Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how's it going?
Going great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic.
Happy June.
Yes, we're kicking off this is our first podcast after the unofficial start of summer. So we're kicking off our summer season.
Yep. And it's about 55 or 60 degrees out there, and it's supposed to rain for the next couple of days and be in the 50s tomorrow, but it'll get nice by the end of the week, they're saying.
I think it was actually warmer in February than it has been during May and June.
At 70s back then, watching people shovel snow after a snowstorm in their shorts. I mean,
Yep.
It's New England.
That's it.
Great stuff. It looks beautiful out there, though.
But today, we're going to be talking about a book that we've actually brought up quite frequently, but we've never gone into details about what the book actually entails. And it's Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog. And we've talked about it in terms of productivity. We've talked about it in terms of time management. But there's a lot of really great concepts in the book. And I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, the term "eat that frog" actually comes from Mark Twain. And what it refers to is that if you eat that frog first thing in the morning, that's going to be the hardest thing you have to do all day. So the rest of your day is easy in comparison to eating a frog. So we'll jump in here. Now, Chip, I know you've been a big proponent of this book.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I've done some time management talks, and this is the template that I use, because basically what the book is just 21 different things that you can do. It says a summary of the 21 great ways to stop procrastinating and get more things done faster. So there's 21 chapters in there, and each chapter explains what the technique is, and it has little working things that you do at the end of that. And it's a book that you're going to want to have sticky notes with when you're reading through it, because obviously you're not going to do 21 different things, but if you can pick 3 or 4 that you're going to be doing constantly, you're going to be a whole lot more productive. It starts with the concept that, number one, success is predictable. And Brian Tracy does a lot of success training and so on and so forth. And one of the things that he talked about was written goals. And all the successful people that he talked to says it all starts with predictable written goals. And that's really what helped them become successful in the first place, is starting out with that. And this book kind of helps you to work on those goals. In fact, the first one, Set the Table, is exactly that. It's deciding exactly what you want, writing down 10 goals, and just getting to work on those.
Yeah, we've talked about setting the table before. It really is important to get those goals down. Writing your goals is key, because it gives an extra level of accountability. You know, it's one thing to say to yourself, I want to do this, but when you put it down on paper, it solidifies it. So it helps you to hold yourself accountable, but it also engages different parts of your brain. If you just think about a goal, that engages a specific part of your brain. Writing it involves an entire separate part of your brain, and reading it back brings in yet another part. So by doing this, you're helping to engage your entire brain, which makes it a lot more likely you're going to follow through and accomplish those goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian talks about the fact that getting into a habit of working on your goals is so important. And he says really the keys to getting things going is what he calls the 3 Ds. And number 1 is decision, making a decision that you're going to do it in the first place. Number 2 is discipline, having the discipline to be working on these things constantly. He's constantly talking about action. And then number 3 is determination, to reach your goals in the first place. So the 3 Ds, decision, discipline, and determination, really help a lot in getting things going. And he also talks about visualizing yourself as you want to be. We talked about Stephen Covey, the 7 habits of
Yep.
highly effective people. It's beginning with the end in mind. And it's not a coincidence that a lot of different success coaches talk about the same thing, just using different language.
Yeah, and another important thing that he mentions in setting the table is that when you put these goals down, to set a deadline for completion. There's an old saying, a goal without a deadline is a daydream. So that deadline is key because it's motivating because you've only given yourself a limited amount of time. But it also allows you to measure it easier because you can track your progress either via calendar or checklist, however it is you want to do that, and see how you're getting closer to that goal.
Yeah, and a lot of it, actually, technique number 2, planning every day in advance, is a great way to do that. And that's just writing down on paper everything that you plan on getting done the next day. And obviously, that's a good system of putting deadlines down and accomplishing those. So, and that's, again, it's talking about thinking on paper. Every minute you spend in planning can save you 5 or 10 minutes the next day. And I know we've talked about your planner that you've put together yourself several times, but that's a great way to do that.
Yeah, and planning the day in advance gives you a leg up when you start in that day. I mean, let's face it, most of us, whether we want to or not, start the day by putting out a fire. We go to our email, we see what the clients are contacting us about, and we jump in that way. And if you start with that and you haven't planned your day in advance, you don't actually get to the planning stage until 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. You've already lost a good part of your day. So by planning in advance, you know what you have to do. You've got it all written down. If you have to put out a fire first thing in the morning, you've already got the planning, so you know how much time you have to deal with that fire before you have to attack those tasks. And it also helps you sleep better because your brain isn't going, oh my God, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? What do I have to do? You've taken care of that. You know what you have to do the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the best ones that he has there to kind of look at how to prioritize things is number 4, which is considering the consequences. And when you wake up in the morning, you look at your most important tasks and the priorities, and what are the most serious consequences, positive or negative, by doing those tasks. On the negative one, obviously, is procrastinating and not getting the positive ones done, like you were talking about.
Yeah, and it happens to us, it's not something anybody plans to happen. It happens because of a lack of planning.
Absolutely. That's a really good way to put it. Lack of planning is just going to put you in a day-to-day flow, which really nothing's going to happen normally when that happens.
Yeah, I heard a great saying a while back. It's either you run the day or the day runs you. And planning the day ahead gives you that step up so that you are in charge of your day. You're not letting things just happen to you.
Yep. And one of the things that he does talk about up front, sometimes it's hard to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to plan to get this thing done. But once you start realizing some successes by getting organized, he talks about developing a positive addiction. And the importance of developing that is you generate your endorphins, which help you out with your clarity and confidence. And it really becomes a habit, a positive addiction, and it helps you through this whole process. So your attitude towards things, which we've talked about in a number of different ways, is so important. So positive addiction is a really, really great way to get things going with this.
Absolutely. And of course, something else that he talks about, I'm going to step back. We've been talking about his step 4, but what he puts as step 3 is the tried and true 80-20 rule. And if you've ever done any kind of sales training, any kind of productivity training, the 80-20 rule always comes up. And Brian Tracy says it very simply: apply it to everything. 80% of your income is coming from 20% of your effort. 80% of your results are coming from 20% of your efforts. So focus on that 20%.
Yeah, absolutely. Even relationships and so on and so forth, 80% of your pleasure probably comes from 20% of your relationships or less. And the 80-20 rule, as you said, it does apply to everything.
Yeah. Now, of course, the entire book is about getting things done. But one of the things that I did find very interesting is his fifth step in all of this is procrastinating. But he calls it creative procrastination. So it's what are you procrastinating about? And he said it's a great thing to take those things that just aren't important and put them off. That's where you should be procrastinating. Focus on the important things, the things that aren't going to generate results, the things that aren't that important or don't really need to be done. That's where you can procrastinate.
Yeah, everybody's list is always going to be too long, and that's a really, really good one, is practicing creative procrastination.
Yeah, and we all have tasks that maybe we don't even put them on the to-do list. Clean out the garage. Most people don't put that on their daily to-do list if they're focusing on work. But it's a task that needs to be done, but in the grand scheme of things, may not be as important. So this gives you permission to procrastinate on things like that. Because the more you're not focusing on unimportant matters, the more important matters are getting taken care of.
Yeah, he talks about practicing the ABCDE method, which is listing all of the tasks that you have to get done and then just ranking them. And what you can do is take a look at the ones that aren't quite as important that you're going to have to get done anyway. And by organizing them properly, you'll be able to fit those in. But again, the key is writing them all down in the first place and then prioritizing when you're going to get them done.
And to go a little deeper into that, it's the A, B, C, D, and E prioritization. A is a task that you have to complete today. There's no procrastinating on that. That's got to be done today. B are tasks that should be done today, but they're not essential. If you don't get to a B today, it's okay, especially if you're putting it aside to do something that you've prioritized with an A. C are tasks that are nice to do, but there's no consequences if they don't get done. It's meeting somebody for coffee, phoning a friend, things like that. Be great if you could get that done, but C's aren't that important. These are tasks that you shouldn't be doing, that you should be delegating to somebody else. In terms of getting information for somebody at work, maybe there's somebody else that's better qualified to do that. In terms of your family, cleaning your kids' room should be delegated to your kids. So D is stuff that it's got to be done, but not necessarily by you. And finally, E are tasks that you might have thought were important at some point. You thought at least they were important enough to put on the list, but now that you've taken a look at it, you realize it's not important at all, and these can be eliminated altogether. So those, if you've got A, B, C's, and D's, you focus on getting those done. E's can fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
So by putting everything in these categories, it shows you exactly what is important for you to be working on right now.
And then he talks about methods of doing things. And one of the most important things that he talks about, which we have talked about before, is single-handling every task, starting immediately on the most important task and then working without stopping until the job is 100% complete instead of multitasking. And if you want high performance, that's the way to do that, because If you start doing several things at once, you're going to have to restart doing everything again, and it's going to take you probably 3 or 4 times as much to do each individual task than it would take if you started one thing and did it from start to finish. So single tasking is really important.
Absolutely. That focus is key. Focus on one thing at a time, do it very well, then move on.
And then the other thing, one of the other things that he talked about, what you do in your organizer itself, is talking about creating large chunks of time. And if you organize your days around these large chunks of time, you can concentrate for extended periods on the most important things that you need to do. So it's not only identifying what you have to do, but taking a look at how long you think you're going to need to get that task done, and then blocking out the time to get that done. And blocking it out means turning off things such as cell phones and computers and so on and so forth, and just concentrating on what you have to get done. A large block of time can include no media or any other interruption type things. And if you can train people that you have to talk to into the fact that for these hours in the day, for a couple of hours, you are unapproachable and you'll get back to them, it's a good thing to do.
Exactly. And it's one of the reasons why a to-do list all by itself isn't necessarily the best way to stay organized. You need a calendar, because you need to be able to block out, okay, I have this to get done. This is when I'm going to get this done. And by scheduling it at specific times, it gives you the structure. Oh, okay, I've got to move on to this. I've got to move on to the next one. But you've blocked out the time. So you know during that period, this is the only thing I'm working on.
Yeah, and one of the things that he does talk about to make those blocks of time really efficient is preparing thoroughly before you begin, which is once you block that period of time out, get everything you need together before you start doing that instead of having to run all over the place. So if you need papers and information and things like that in one place to get things going, it's important to gather all that stuff up front before you start working on things.
Right. A great example of this is professional chefs. Before they start making a recipe, they pull all of their ingredients down and they have them all right in front of them before they start cooking. Same thing goes for your tasks. Make sure you've got everything you need at hand, whether it's pen and paper, if it's specific information you need to look up that you need to have available while you're working. Make sure you have everything you need when you start.
Absolutely. And a couple of other things that he talks about that are related. Number one, there are things that we are good at and there are things that we aren't as good at. He talks about the law of three, which is identifying 3 things that you do in your work that account for 90% of your contribution. And that's what you need to focus on doing before anything else. And obviously, if you're in a work situation, there are other people that are going to fill in the holes where you're not as good. But if you can identify what you're good at, and another one that is related to that is number 12, which is leveraging your special talents. Take a look at yourself and get input from your boss or whoever if you're working in a situation like that, and determine what you are best at doing or could be really good at, and that's what you really need to go 100% into.
Absolutely. And on the flip side of that, not only should you be leveraging your special talents, but he also talks about identifying what your key constraints are. What is it that's holding you back from getting these things done? And for certain things, you can improve on those skills, but other things, it's just better to outsource. The example I use very frequently is bookkeeping. Most of us have the capability of doing our own bookkeeping, but it'll probably take us a lot longer than it would a professional bookkeeper. So if that's not your key strength, hire somebody, outsource it, and let them take care of it because that is their key strength.
And if you take that into a business situation where you're running a business, even if you're good at bookkeeping and this and that, whatever, what are the key constraints to a business? If you take a look at things that I always recommend that business people sub out their payroll, sub out their accounting, sub out their HR, because those are headaches that they don't need, number one. And number two, where they're most productive most of the time is in business development and operations management. And any time that they put into those three things that they're taking away from business development and operations management normally is taking away from the top line and also from productivity. So the constraints are really important, not just personally, but in a business.
Exactly. And of course, once you've identified what those key skills of yours are, he talks about the fact that you want to continually upgrade those skills. Things change. Just because you learned something, when you were in college 20 years ago, doesn't mean the same processes are going to work as well now. Certainly, I was in college in the early 90s. I studied marketing, advertising, communications. There was no internet. There was no social media. So most of the communications work I do now, the principles I learned stay the same, but the processes are completely different. So you need to keep upgrading those skills and keep up on what's going on.
Absolutely. Life in business is an ongoing process. And if you're not working on yourself, you are going to fall behind. I think I can't remember how you talk about this, but as being the best that you can possibly be or being the best professional that you can possibly be. You want to talk about that a little bit because I forget the exact phrase that I'm trying to bring up here.
I'm not sure which phrase you're talking about, but you do need to be your best. And when you have specific skills are like muscles. If you don't use them, they atrophy. So you need to keep up on what goes on. Technology's always changing. And even within technology, if you're doing something a certain way, and the only reason you're doing it that way is because that's how you've always done it, the odds are you're not bringing your best to that job.
Yeah, I think I remember it now. It's being perceived as the source of expertise or professionalism in your field, being perceived as the expert. And in order to do that, obviously, you have to continue to be working on yourself. So,
yes, I talk about that. If you don't put yourself forward as an expert, why is somebody going to choose you to do business with? They want to get the best result for themselves. So you have to put yourself forward as an expert in what you do. And the first part of that is accepting the fact that, yes, you are an expert. And the second is making sure that you stay an expert by keeping up on all the new activities that go on.
absolutely. And one of the other things that he does talk about, obviously, if you are continuing to become an expert in your field, you're going to take some time studying things and so on and so forth. But one of the traps that you can get into by doing that is kind of going off on a tangent technologically. And one of his key things here is getting out of the technological time sinks, which is you got to use technology to improve the quality of your communications, but don't allow yourself to become a slave to it, and turn things off and leave them off, as we talked about before, when you're working on things.
Right, and that's something that most of us deal with every day. We should not be checking email constantly. We should not be checking Facebook constantly. These are great tools, but they need to be used as tools, not as time wasters.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you can do too, which I think you have in your planner, is to actually write down what you're doing every minute of the day so that you can take a look at where you are leaking things and where you are getting trapped in these things where you're not being as productive as you could be. It's number one. It's one thing to plan things, but to track what you're doing actually for a week or two or whatever, you'll see where you're spending your time. And if you look at the different percentages that you're putting things into, it'll become crystal clear what you need to work on.
Absolutely. By going through that, most of us don't realize where we spend our time. Time is perception. So if we're doing something that we actually enjoy, large periods of time tend to slip away from us. The same thing happens when we're using time wasters. If we're, talking to somebody on Facebook, we may think, oh, I just spent a couple of minutes. That's okay. And then you look at the clock and 45 minutes have gone by. By actually writing it down and tracking what you do over a period of time, you really get a feel for what your own habits are that may have been unconscious for you. And you can see where you're letting that time slip away.
Yeah, one of the tools that you can kind of use psychologically that he talks about is putting pressure on yourself. And by that, what he talks about, he says, imagine that you have to leave town for a month and work as if you had to get all your major tasks completed before you left. I can't go on that vacation before I get this thing done. I can't do this or I can't do that before I get this thing done. And put a little pressure on yourself that way.
Yeah, and that works fantastically. If you think about it, the day before you're about to leave on vacation, you're wrapping up projects, you're cleaning your desk, you're making sure everything is perfect. Now think of it as each day. Oh, I'm going on vacation tomorrow, I'm not going to be here, and put yourself in that mindset. You get so much more done that way. It is actually amazing how well that works.
Yeah, and that's actually the best way to really develop this positive addiction. But we went right back to that in the first place. Because if you have a really great day every single day, your endorphins are always going to be high and your success is going to be a habit.
That's it. And one of the other things he talks about is slice and dicing tasks. And basically what that means is Einstein actually put it as you want to make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. Large tasks are daunting. You want to break those up into smaller pieces. So the example I usually use is building a website. Building a website is this big, vague task, but when you break it down into creating what pages are going to be on the website, then write content for these pages, then choose images for these pages, and you break it down that way, it makes it a lot easier and you can get through it a lot faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's an important part about really starting with task number 9, which is preparing thoroughly before you begin. You got to have a plan ahead of time, and slicing and dicing things up front is going to help you prepare also.
Absolutely. We're actually coming up on the end of our time here. One thing I do want to bring up is the whole purpose of Eat That Frog is to get the biggest, most difficult task done first. I always recommend people understanding how they work best. Maybe eating that frog first thing isn't the best thing for you if your key energy is 2 or 3 hours into the day. That's when you want to put your biggest effort, when you're at your peak energy. But before we wrap up, Chip, what do you think the big takeaway from Eat That Frog is?
Well, I highly recommend getting the book. And as I say, it's broken up into 21 chapters, and we've talked about most of them today. Sit there with some sticky notes and sticky note the ones that you think are the best, and then start writing down those goals and putting together a plan of action using the ones that you choose to help you out. It will definitely help you out big time.
Yeah, I agree. My big takeaway is write everything down. Whether it's the goals, your to-do list, your calendar, your habits. When you write these things down, it becomes easier to handle and it motivates you more. Don't keep it all in your head. Get it all on paper. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at blogtalkradio.com/success showcase. You can also catch us on the Apple Podcasts app and the iTunes Store. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. See you then.